Hello everyone, I am the Enforcer and welcome to the breaking news. Today's breaking news is that a Russian missile cruiser inside the city of Baltiysk inside of the Kaliningrad Oblast has been put out of action due to Ukrainian sabotage attack. According to the information that we have been able to find from the Ukrainian SBU, shown in this clip right here, they were able to enter the naval yards at Baltiysk inside of Kaliningrad and set fire inside of one of the sensitive component areas of the vessel, leading it to be further disabled and completely knocked out of action until further notice. We can see here in this video the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense showing the actions of their operatives as they moved into Baltiysk and set fire to the vessel. We can also see the fire being set inside of the missile cruiser right here. And we can see that they deem it to be an overall success. This is a very interesting move, and the first time we've ever seen a Russian naval vessel being put out of action that is not directly within the theater of operations near to the region of the Black Sea. This is a major ordeal and is once again showing that Russian naval security and Russian military security as a whole is extremely lacking, as these operatives were able to make their way into the Baltiysk naval yards on the very far fringe of Kaliningrad on the very edge of a peninsula, and were able to set fire to this vessel, and inside of the vessel relatively easy, much easier than we would have been led to believe at the beginning of the war. We don't know exactly what mooring or what wharf that the missile cruiser was at, but nevertheless, the damage does appear to have been rather significant, and it appears that there may have been no crew members nearby to fight the blaze when it immediately began, and so we assume that the damage has been quite severe, and that the vessel is mostly going to have to be moved to dry dock for some kind of a refit or repairs to be conducted on the vessel before it's seaworthy again. Considering the absolute lack of usable dry docks in most areas of the Russian Federation at the moment, we would assume that this vessel will most likely be knocked out of action for several months, or it may be prioritized on the repair schedule, and it may be moved into a dry dock without further delay, and may be underway and at sea again within the next 2 to 2.5 months. Regardless, this is once again a massive victory for the Ukrainians as far as the damage that they were able to cause to the Russian Navy, not just the Black Sea Fleet. And it appears that the Ukrainians are going to be using every single chance and every single available option that they can to try and cause as much damage to the Russian Federation forces as is physically possible for them. Speaking of which, the reason why I was stuttering there is that we've been getting some very concerning information today from the office of the President of Ukraine that makes it seem that these actions are being taken because they are trying to find a way to cause as much damage to the Russian Federation that will end the war as soon as possible. As President Zelensky has made a statement today saying that U.S. support is vital, and without further U.S. support, Ukraine will inevitably end up losing the war. According to the direct quote from President Zelensky, he said, "If the U.S. Congress does not help Ukraine, Ukraine will lose the war." This is something that is a very concerning statement, considering that this is making it quite clear that the entire war hinges on continued U.S. support, which has been an incredibly difficult issue to tackle ever since the ending part of last year around November and December. So far, the vote will be held tomorrow in the House of Representatives to see if the support bill that is currently on the floor will be able to move forward to the Senate. We believe that it will be approved in the Senate if it's approved in the House, and then it will be approved by the Office of the President of the United States, once again allowing these funds to be given to Ukraine in the form of direct material support, such as weapons and equipment up front. We understand that the aid package that is being proposed right now hardly includes any actual hard cash for the Ukrainian government, but is more so monetary values of raw military support. Hopefully we will see that pass through, because it's becoming quite clear from the Ukrainian government's end that U.S. support is very important and incredibly vital to helping them achieve victory in Ukraine and to be able to keep fighting this war that the Russians seem adamant on not letting go, although the Russians are in very dire straits at this point inside of the Russian Federation. We've been able to get news today that the Russians are apparently going to start rationing oil or completely run out of refined oil products here within the very near future, as we heard today that the Russians have struck up a deal with Kazakhstan to provide them with about 100,000 tons of gasoline in case of shortages due to Ukrainian drone attacks on refineries. 100,000 tons is an excessively large amount of gasoline that the Russians are asking for, or really trying to buy from the Kazakhstanis, but nevertheless, it is starting to show that the Russians are desperately running low on fuel, and that the Ukrainian attacks on oil refineries are ensuring that the Russians will not be able to financially keep up this war much longer. While they may be able to outsource their gasoline from other countries such as Kazakhstan, the price for that gas will exponentially increase. Producing refined oil products out of crude oil inside of your country is an incredibly cheap way to keep the nation running, and it's the way all countries around the world do it. But importing the refined fuel products such as gasoline from a country like Kazakhstan is going to greatly increase the cost of gas inside of Russia, and is most likely going to heavily reduce economic activity or stagnate it or start to actually create a backslide where they start moving on into a tougher economic situation. This may be a Ukrainian attempt, like we were saying earlier, to force the Russians to economically or strategically end the war, because there will be no way for them to effectively carry on its continuance. And this is something that once again is already showing that the Russians are hard-strapped for cash and not really getting a lot of options or a lot of room to be able to do whatever they would wish with their funding, really more so than putting it directly into the war in Ukraine. We've been able to hear that the city of Orenburg has now been flooded as well due to the break of the Orsk Dam that occurred just several days ago. Not only is Orsk halfway underwater, but now Orenburg is also starting to flood as well. It's one of the most serious humanitarian crises that we've seen inside the Russian Federation, and from what we can understand at the moment, with the amount of people affected, this actually affects more people than the Novokakhovka Dam explosion did inside of Ukraine in early 2023. This was entirely caused, from what we understand now, not because of a Ukrainian sabotage or a partisan attack on the dam. This was actually caused because the dam had been completely neglected by Russian authorities for decades, and the now derelict and collapsing dam ruptured due to a failure of the Russian government to maintain it, or having the complete lack of funds to be able to do such a thing. Now we're seeing that one of the largest humanitarian crises inside of the Russian Federation is now occurring in modern times, and it's once again showing us that the Russians have hardly any funding to allocate to anything beyond the war in Ukraine at this point. They can't even repair basic dams. This is, from what we understand, an earthen dam made entirely of just dirt. They weren't even able to allocate the funds to repair a dam like that. They're not even able to allocate enough humanitarian or rescue forces to be able to help out in the city either, in Orenburg or in Orsk. It is an incredibly serious situation, and if the Russians were not fighting the war in Ukraine, it could be said that they would have tens of billions, if not $100 billion extra in government spending that could be allocated to infrastructure upkeep projects. But right now, none of that money is making it to the Russian people. It's instead being completely diverted into the Ukrainian war effort to try and keep the Russian army somewhat afloat and somewhat alive, although their advances and their successes in Ukraine are once again not even existent. They're immeasurable because there are no successes or large victories that the Russian Federation has been having over the past month or month and a half inside of Ukraine, since the fall of Avdiivka during the Battle of Avdiivka. But the footage continues to show us the absolute scale of the flooding, and once again proves to us that the Russians are dealing with a humanitarian crisis of a level that can't even be ascertained at the moment. And once again, the Russian authorities are incredibly silent on the matter and are not really letting us hear a lot about how many cities really are affected. All we know at the moment is that everything in between Orenburg and Orsk is affected by the flooding, which is an incredibly large area, but beyond that, we don't know how much farther it spreads in any other direction. But you can see that this is an incredibly wide swath of the Russian Federation. From Orsk to Orenburg, that is a whopping 150 miles of floodplain that is being affected. To put that into perspective, the Novokakhovka Dam rupture affected a swath of Ukrainian land that was around 40 miles in length, meaning already that the Novokakhovka Dam rupture is smaller in its consequences and damage than the Orsk Dam rupture is. And what's even crazier is that the Russians have brought this massive humanitarian crisis on themselves, not by their dam being in the middle of a war zone and another country deliberately blowing it up to try and cause as much damage as possible to the other side. This is being caused by the Russians from sheer incompetence. Not only that, but infrastructure is collapsing in other areas. The major highway in between Smolensk and the city of Orsha inside of Belarus had a bridge that collapsed today as well, leading the entire highway to now be unusable as a corridor in between Belarus and Russia, and we were able to see this bridge collapse here on this video. When you see a truck driving over and the bridge spans completely cave in, the truck goes falling to the ground, and we can somehow see someone that was waiting on the train platform running away, who apparently was completely unscathed, which is incredibly fortunate for them. Beyond that, Russian infrastructure is completely collapsing. To give you all a little bit of an explanation about this bridge, from what we've been told, this bridge was constructed in the 1930s by the Soviet Union. It was then renovated in 1980 and has not been touched or repaired since 1980, meaning that it's gone an entire 44 years without a single maintenance check or a single, more so, inspection on the bridge and its condition, and now the bridge has been led into critically collapsing today. It appears that the Russian Federation has absolutely no funds whatsoever to repair infrastructure, and it's now starting to crumble almost all at the same time around the Russian Federation, on top of the Russian government continuously funding massive amounts of money into the Russian military to try and keep the war going. It looks like at this rate, with the Russians asking for gas and infrastructure collapsing all throughout Russia, causing massive issues, that the Russians may not be able to keep this war going much longer. And if the United States is able to support Ukraine, possibly for another year or a year and a half, this war will most likely come to an end because the Russians are crumbling from the inside out. We also understand that the Russians are attempting to try and end the Ukrainians as fast as possible and have been attacking Ukrainian thermal power plants and other forms of power plants inside of Ukraine to try and knock the Ukrainian energy grid offline permanently. The Lithuanians have stepped forward and offered to give spare power plant parts to the Ukrainians from their now deactivated thermal power plants, so that way they may be able to try and get some of the Ukrainian energy grid up and running again, or at least allow for less blackouts over each day. We've also been able to hear that inside of Romania, the British fighter squad has been moved into the area and will apparently be conducting joint defense operations along with the Romanian Air Force within the region. This is apparently part of the Western nations starting to believe, especially European countries, that the Russians are incredibly aggressive and that their war aims are not just in Ukraine, but lie within Eastern Europe as a whole. For this reason, we're starting to see the diversion of more resources and efforts by the French, the British, and the Germans into the area of Eastern Europe, along with the Poles, as they all seek to try and prepare for what they believe is an inevitable conflict. But with that, that is all of the major breaking news that we have today. I've got to thank you all so much once again for watching. If y'all have enjoyed, please make sure to subscribe and support us on Patreon. The link is in the description below, and I cannot give a massive shout out enough to all of the patrons who've been supporting this channel and help to make these kinds of video projects possible. Of course, I thank you all so much once again for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.